everyone, it's Holly Marie King, and we are finally, after a couple weeks of not, going to read the final draft of Not a Dream, Chapter 4. We're very behind the rough draft. Anyway, so let's get started. Chapter 4, Walking into the Den of a Monster. No adventure yet. We're working on the adventure, though. The gown that Helen wore since the day she had arrived at the mansion was long, and so she held it in one hand as she walked down the corridor. The first time she had tried to escape, she had gone to the left of her room. Today, she went towards the ominous darkness. That wouldn't be a good idea if you had thoughts of living to the next day. But today, she wanted to meet danger face to face. The hallway was dark, which made Helen walk with her free hand out in front of her to make sure she didn't run into anything or miss the door. So, already beating previous Helen when she ran face first into the door. So, go final draft, Helen. She had to walk close to the wall, moving slowly along instead of taking as little time as possible. Helen was rewarded for her agonizing patience by finding a door. It was a plain wooden door, made out of 2 thick boards. There was a window there, too. The light from torches shone through it, making it visible in the dark. The window pane was green and red like a checkerboard, and the frame was in a half circle. The line separating the squares had a golden tint to it. Helen was fascinated by the look of it, but nonetheless she was searching for a way to open it with her hand. She found the doorknob, turning it. Cold air rushed around her as she opened the door. The air made the torches flicker and die. Helen took a deep breath and stepped inside. She could hear music from down below. The stairs were as dark as the hallway. With each step she had to feel for the stair. The door closed quietly behind her when she had moved away from it. If that hadn't been a sign enough that this was a dumb idea, maybe the fact that she was walking down towards ominous music would have been a big hint. When she finally reached the bottom of the 250-step staircase, she counted every one to keep her mind off the pressing darkness and the voice mocking her the whole way down. There were 2 torches on the wall. It was bright after being in the dark, and the music was playing even beyond that. So, she took another step through the doorway. The room itself was dark with gray walls. All it had was a piano and a music box sitting in the middle of the room. It was the source of the music. The music box was sitting on what looked like a throw rug. It was a red color, with a golden line in the picture killing antelope in a forest. Helen avoided looking at the blood on the lion's mouth. So, instead, she focused on the outside of the rug. It was a circular with golden fringes all around it. "This is what's going to happen to you," the voice said, laughing at her. She again decided to shake off the voice. It was going to drive her mad if she kept listening to it. When she had entered the room, there was another young woman, all rowdy, standing in the center of the throw rug. She had blonde hair that was wrapped securely in a tight bun. She wore leather from head to toe and carried with her an axe that was stained in blood with rust from not being cleaned in a long time. Helen watched as the girl used her booted foot to close the music box. "Come out and play, Troy!" the woman's sing-song voice echoing off the walls. Helen's heart pounded heavily in her chest. She knew her plan was to come down here and talk with the vampire, but she couldn't help being afraid. "Seriously, I came all this way, and you're going to just lay around all day without saying hi?" Helen stifled a gasp when Troy landed between her and the woman. He had fallen so silently that it surprised her. "Why do you always wake me up in the middle of the day, Cat?" he said irritably. Cat just shrugged at him, as though she had not a care in the world. He then turned from Cat and faced Helen. She still had her hand over her mouth. "And why are you out of your room?" Helen never planned for a conversation. It made her feel stupid for even coming down there in the first place. She looked at the woman, who stared at her with bright green eyes. The woman had an intense stare. "I thought that since you already had a guest, you wouldn't mind a second." Cat chuckled at her words. "This girl's quite interesting. Is she the new candidate?" "Candidate?" Helen was confused for a split second, and then recalled her conversation with Eric. She looked at the girl again, noticing a lonely look in her eye. "For that stupid trial?" Cat laughed at this remark. "Yes, that would be the one. It seems you don't want to do this." "It Also seems as though I don't have much of a choice, Helen replied unhappily. How about you choose to go back to your room before you are made to go there? Troy said irritably. He didn't look happy to be woken up during the day a second time. Don't worry, she'll get there sooner or later, Kat said, a smile on her face. You aren't one of them. So why do you look so sad? Helen asked, thinking out loud. My daughter, Kat answered. Just those 2 words to explain it all. Well, as nice as this was, I think it's best that I leave now. Helen turned to leave. I'll come see you later. Troy spoke, making shivers go up and down Helen's spine. Till then, Helen said tightly. She quickly stepped onto the first step and walked as quickly as she could up the long staircase. When she was at the top and opened the door, she found herself face to face with the angel yet again. He always seemed to be everywhere she was. Hello, the angel said, his voice just the right sound. Hi, Helen said dreamily. She blushed at the sight of him. He was so handsome with blonde hair and blue eyes, the picture of Prince Charming through and through. She then recognized him from before, when he had helped destroy her door, making her remember herself. She wasn't meeting a stranger by chance, but that he was part of the men that had kidnapped her. In fact, he was the man that had abducted her. Who did you mean to grab when you took me? Huh? Damon asked, looking at her confused. Don't play dumb. I overheard you talking in the kitchen the first night I was here. You were supposed to take someone else, but you took me by mistake. Who were they? Helen demanded. Does it really matter all that much? The angel asked her. We have you now. It matters because you grabbed the wrong person. I want to know who it was you were supposed to grab. Helen stood firm with her arms crossed over her chest. Tell him. Anna Sullivan, Damien answered her. The voice clicked its tongue at her. You shouldn't have asked. It chuckled at her now. Helen swallowed the scream that had risen in her throat. Excuse me. She brushed past him into her room. I can't believe this. She threw a pillow on the floor in her frustration. It didn't satisfy her need to destroy things, but she found a glass ornament that she could throw. She lifted it over her head in anticipation, but in thinking about what this would accomplish, she put the object back where she'd gotten it and went over to the window to cool off. Is nothing mine? The day was excruciating waiting for Troy to enter her room to take her life, or talk about things that she didn't want to know about. She sat by her window to pass the time. She now found this very relaxing. Greg entered her room again at some point, but she barely nodded her head to show she knew he was there. The sunset then came too soon for Helen's liking. She was under the impression that this would be her last day. You shouldn't sit like that. Your legs will fall asleep. Troy's voice brought chills to Helen's spine. I don't mind, Helen answered. She could feel the tingling in her legs already. I've been watching you for some time, and they seem to be doing a good job keeping you in here. So, how did you get out of this room? Troy was pacing back and forth behind her, leaving gusts of cold air to pass through Helen's hair. Did you put a lock on the door when you fixed it? Helen offered. Fingers clamped onto her shoulders, hurting her instantly. She was forced to her feet and was looking into his dark red eyes before she had time to gasp in pain. How dare you mock me, child? His voice was full of venom as he hissed at her. No, I'm sorry if I offended you. It was just a question, Helen gasped. She was thrown to the floor. She breathed heavily as the vampire glided to the door to investigate the lock. Smart girl. Troy grabbed the door frame and pointed to the empty place where he'd forgotten the keyhole. I'll fix this immediately. We wouldn't want any nasty accidents now, would we? Helen watched the door wide-eyed as he left. She continued to stare at the door when it closed behind him. She then slid the rest of the way to the floor and thanked God that it was so solid. What am I doing here? She asked herself before closing her eyes to fall asleep on the floor. Helen opened her eyes as the sun was rising. She sat up, feeling the dull ache in her body from sleeping on the hard floor. She spent a couple minutes just sitting against the side of the bed on the floor with her eyes closed to think. She wished escaping was a lot easier than it sounded. You'll never escape, the voice whispered, making Helen's mood even worse. The voice wasn't going away, and it was beginning to make her feel more despair as time went on. That's when Greg entered the room with her breakfast. He walked over to her and handed her the tray. Good morning, he said with a goofy grin on his face. Morning, Helen said sleepily. She took a bite of the eggs on her tray. I was wondering, she said to Greg as he sat down beside her. Yes? Greg crossed his legs, settling himself. Where do you get all your food? A plan was already forming in her head. The market, Greg replied, giving her a strange look. Why? Where do you get your food? I get it at the same place. I just wasn't sure if you grew your own food or if you actually go out and buy it, Helen said with a smile on her face. This plan would go over well. So, who goes and buys his groceries? Well, since Eric has so many experiments in his room, he does all the shopping for us, Greg answered, looking at Helen searchingly. Why do you want to know? I was just curious. I've only been able to see this room since I've been here. It would be so nice to be able to see where you buy all your things, she said gloomily. Oh, well, I'll just stay here and look out my window. It has such a beautiful view of the outside world. She then finished her breakfast while Greg watched her intently. She smiled to herself as he left her room with a concerned look on his face. The seed was planted. Now she only had to wait for the guilt tree to grow. Miss Helen is like 10 times better than the one that I wrote in the rough draft. I personally think so, only because she's not a giant crybaby. Don't worry, she does cry, just not as often. Alright, well that's the end of chapter 4. And finally in chapter 5, we get to meet Allison, or Alice as she usually gets called. So look forward to that. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I would be more than happy to answer any questions about the book you have. And if you are interested in purchasing said book, it is going to be in the description below. And yeah, looks like I'll just see you guys next time. Bye!